Welcome back to another amazing episode of Krusty Car News, where used cars the topic today, and we've got a new friend joining us today for 5 amazing topics from the car market repo apocalypse is hitting us now, how not to get screwed on your used car trade, buyer beware, there's a new tactic by these car dealers, Ford shocks the buyers with this whole new cheap Ford truck, as well as the 5 do's and don'ts of your next used car buying purchased experience. So go ahead, grab your favorite beverage, grab your favorite buddy, sit back and enjoy the ride. Let's get into it now. Life's too short to drive boring cars. The first story, we're going to share some of the devastating repossessions in the car market today. People are getting way over their heads, overextending themselves, long loan terms, negative equity, biting off more than they could chew. And now we've finally seen the rubber hit the road. People are losing their vehicles at an alarming rate. I mean, you see these new trucks, you know, that cost 80 or 90 grand. You see these little SUVs and they're in that $40,000 to $50,000 range. And we are living in a cost of living crisis. And I don't know about you, but for myself, I look around and I wonder, how can people afford all these expensive new vehicles? Did you realize the average transaction price today is of almost $50,000 for a vehicle? And as well, a vast majority of people in their car loans are up to about $750 per month, with almost 20% of those loans being over $1,000 a month. And that's in the US side of the border. You look over a stone's throw in Canada, and the average car loan is up in that $1,200 to $1,500 a month. And I've seen lots of people driving around in trucks and SUVs that they're making payments of $2,000 a month. So how can people afford this? Well, the fact is they can't. And that's right, repossessions are grossly on the rise. We haven't seen numbers like this since way back in 2009 as a result of the fallout of this catastrophic economic crisis there's existed back in 2008. People that probably shouldn't have been able to take out loans, they've been buying cars in the last 4 or 5 years. If you follow some of the best practices and the rule of thumb, like I often throw out there, the largest deposit, especially when interest rates are high, then the more you minimize those monthly payments. But a lot of people say, you know what, I'm going to throw a minimum down, I'm going to make these massive payments, and we'll be good. But the problem was, what they didn't realize is a lot of these prices were overinflated. There was market adjustment fees, a lot of dealers weren't negotiating, or people were just okay paying top dollar and not even asking any questions. So of course, naturally, with this, this new innovation of EVs, hybrid vehicles, expensive trucks, cars, Stellantis is a classic with their price hikes on some of their Jeeps. Prices were very high. So for vehicles and brands that were conventionally bad depreciating suspects, you typically drove that off the lot and you saw a 20 to 30% discount or depreciation value right off the hop. Now, a lot of people saw this and came into some financial hardships and realized, uh-oh, I've got to panic. I better get rid of this vehicle. I can't afford to make these payments. So repossessions start to rise. Other cases, negative equity, or basically underwater, is a lot of situations that people found themselves in, overpaying for these vehicles on the front end, going to try to trade it in 3 years later at the end of a possible purchase. They want to get their next vehicle and they're trying to roll over some of that negative equity into their next car loan and realizing, wait a minute, I've got to come up with an extra $15,000, $20,000 to get into my next vehicle just to buy my way out of this one because I overpaid brand new. You know what? I can't afford this. Let the bank come and take it. So according to Bloomberg News, 2024 was an absolute catastrophic year. 1.73 million vehicles were seized by the lenders because people were defaulting. That's right, repossessions were at an alarming rate and they could no longer make their payments. The decision to eat or have a roof over their head or that new shiny pickup truck in the driveway, well, guess what hit the road first? The truck. A lot of cases, the tow truck driver, repossession driver would show up in the middle of the night, drag that truck away, and off it went, of course, to auctions where it was raffled off and auctioned off to try to recuperate some of the money and the loss by the lenders. Cox Automotive states that these high numbers of repossessions were actually up 16% from 2023 and up 43% from the year before. The numbers are absolutely telling and catastrophic by very nature. People cannot make their payments. They just wanted the next shiny toy. They went in there, they bought it. Even many subprime borrowers are now finding themselves repossessed upon almost to the tune of about 7%. That's right, the numbers are up. Subprime borrowers are borrowing at extremely high interest rates these days, and that's another contributing factor. A lot of these loans will almost never be paid off by the time the bank comes a-knocking. See, a big contributing factor is even though a lot of people were still looking to buy, they sort of disregarded the interest rates, which was another major contributing factor. In February, it went up another 5 basis points on average, up to about 10.16%, which is the highest we've seen in 4 months. So people are paying a lot of money on their interest charges on their loans alone. This, by very nature, has bumped up the average car payment to about $748 per month. You know, I've been screaming this for quite some time and saying, look, you have to get into what you can afford. Live within your means. And buying a new car is always a wonderful experience. Getting that set of keys to your brand new vehicle like this can always be one of those best moments in your life. Next to maybe getting married, having children, this too, in fact, is one of those best moments. But unfortunately, you've got to live within your means and do it when you can afford it. Higher down payments, reduce your monthly charges, and of course, shorten up your overall loan term means that you're going to have a better level of success. Don't you also be subject to one of these repossessions? Make sure you follow some of my tips on the best way to buy your next new or used car. The next story, I promised you I would share what's going on when you're trading in your vehicle. So many people leave so much money on the table. It's absolutely tragic. Dealers need your used vehicle, so let them pay for it.
Many new cars are discounted heavily these days because of the high prices. A lot of customers can't muster enough money to scratch 2 pennies together to buy a brand new vehicle, even with some of the incentives. And while we're seeing a lot of new car sales going up, there are more and more customers pushed out of that market, ultimately looking for used cars. The used car market has been an extremely popular one. If you've got a car these days and it's a late model vehicle and maybe it's clean car proof and it's low miles and it's been well looked after, you've got a gem. And a lot of people don't realize that when they're going in to buy their new vehicle and they're going for a trade-in, quite often people give up the upper hand and give their vehicle away for next to nothing. People are always just enamored by their new vehicle. They want to get into that new vehicle and are willing to give up their slightly used vehicle for next to nothing. Did you realize used vehicle inventory is now down to about 2.14 million units across the industry as of March, based on Cox Automotive information? And unfortunately, the supply of good quality used vehicles is dwindling away, and there's much more of these older generational vehicles. Vehicles that maybe have a little bit of rust, vehicles that have broken parts, vehicles that have mismatched paint and high mileage like 300,000 miles on them. But a lot of people love these new shiny vehicles, and Nissan Armada is a beautiful unit, but they don't come cheap, and that's why people are starting to look at used. When we're looking at price tags of $95,000 for a brand new Armada Pro 4X, while they are great and glorious, by the time you put all of your extras, your paint film on here, mats, and all of the extra doodads and top of the taxes, all in, you're looking at vehicles that are well over 6 figures or $100,000. And not everybody wants one of these old rusted out, clapped out units, although a lot of people are perfectly fine driving these old vehicles. Look, they were using oil there to prevent the rust from developing in the doors. This vehicle is run hard, put away wet, and has a ton of miles on it. The average used vehicle on the market today, though, actually has about 70,000 miles on it based on Cox Automotive. Most people are perfectly comfortable in buying a used vehicle with 50, 60, 70, 80,000 miles on it because many vehicles nowadays are built to outlast many of those from 20, 30 years ago. And many car lots across the nation have an industry average now of only 39 days supply. So in other words, if they sold a vehicle every single day, if they sold their current inventory, they would only have inventory good for about 39 days or just over a month if they didn't receive any new trades. So you can see how a lot of these manufacturers, a lot of these specific dealers are looking for good quality used vehicles for trade-ins. And while this BMW is clearly an example of one of those on the higher end of the spectrum, you have this older Plymouth Voyager that's on the lower end of the spectrum. But the average right now is $25,000 for the average vehicle on the used car market in the US. And the average age of the vehicles on the road these days is climbing. It's up to actually over 13 years of age. You know, well, 10 years ago, the average age was closer to 8 years of age. Now most vehicles today are closer to that 13 and almost 14 years of age. So used cars are increasing in popularity. A lot of it has to do with the simplicity. A lot of people prefer the older technology. But more importantly, it's about the cost. You know, electrification, a lot of people are not fans of electrification. They're trying to backdate. But again, a lot of it ultimately is due to cost. The cost, the inflationary increases of some of these vehicles means that more people are buying older used vehicles, vehicles that are 10, 12, 15 years of age. And the dealers know that. The dealers know that those vehicles are popular and they're trying to get their hands on them. So they want your trades. They want the vehicle that you have to look into flip for you to move into that new vehicle. They want your trade. That's a major negotiation tactic. Quick and knee-jerk to get in there, pay market adjustment fees, pay more than a lot of these vehicles were worth, and then find themselves in a negative equity position. In other words, trying to trade in 3 years later and finding that they owed more than the vehicle was actually worth, and they had to top it up just to clear the loan, or they had to roll it over, that loss or that negative equity, into their next car loan on their trade-in. So a lot of people learned the hard way in the last few years by overpaying for brand new vehicles was not the best way, or not the best financial sense. And even the fact that brand new interest rates on these vehicles are in that 4, 5, 6%, and the fact that used vehicle interest rates are up around that 12 to 13% currently, there still is enough incentive for people to buy some of those slightly used vehicles. There's enough of a discount in buying an older used vehicle, say with 50, 60,000 miles on it. You still have a service life that could get you up to 200,000 miles if you look after it. Clearly the indication is a strong used car market is ramping up. Now with tax season underway, people are coming with tax in hand or cash in hand, and that doesn't always buy them a new vehicle, or it may buy them a deposit for a new vehicle, but rather a lot of people can walk down and pay cash for a slightly used vehicle when they get their tax refunds back. And these are examples of some of those vehicles that people can walk in and buy, no questions asked. They may even say that they're going to put a CPO on it because of the low mileage, and that's all going to cost them money. They have to market it, and there's all those dollars. They're going to throw that your way and say, look, they're going to typically nickel and dime you, try to knock you down on the value of your car when you're going to trade it in. You're probably not going to get retail price realistically for your car as a trade-in. That's the cost of doing business. That's the convenience of walking into the dealership and negotiating and just getting rid of your car. You're not going to get that full retail value, but there is a number. So there's a couple ways to look at this. You want to get full dollars for your car. You look on Car Gurus, you look at the local classifieds, and you get a pretty roundabout way. You look at this great little Audi and you realize, okay, I've looked specifications. Yes, I have the moonroof. I have the upgraded wheels. I have the better improved sound system. Yes, this vehicle's worth $30,000 on the market all day long. Okay, it's worth 30 grand on the retail market. You know that. That seems to be what the asking price is for about 10 other models in your area. Of course, you look at this beautiful little Audi Q5 Quattro, and it's a great vehicle. It's in good shape. This is your vehicle. Now you're wondering what the best approach is. Well, there's a couple of options. Of course, one is you don't want to deal with hagglers and tire kickers, and you don't want to deal with a lot of salespeople. So your one option is, of course, trading it in. But realize that trade-in will likely cost you about 15%, because the industry averages about 15%. So if it's a $30,000 vehicle in the retail market, you could pretty much anticipate to give up about $5,000 to $4,000, $4,000 to $5,000 to the dealer, because they don't know what they're going to get into. I mean, look at a vehicle like this. They're going to have to put a $500 windshield on that. They might have to do a set of front brakes on there, and they're going to go through it and do some conditioning. They're not going to eat those costs. They're going to want to make sure that they've got enough money in there that they can put a few dollars into it, and then hopefully make a couple grand profit on the tail end once they list it on their lot. So honestly, that's the line of business they're in. They're not in the business for charity. They're in the business to make money. Now, granted, they're all going to give you a song and dance and say, poor me and woe is me, but just know that's pretty standard average, just about 15%. So you're pretty much going to go in there, you're hoping to get 30 grand, trade in value, they might give you 26 on a good day. The other option, of course, is just trying to stick handle it yourself and take your vehicle and sell it on the used car market yourself and hope for the best. Now, granted, you know, there's always that issue, tire kickers, dealing with people. Some people are fake, some people don't have the money or the resources, or they're playing games with you, and there's all kinds of scams that you have to be aware of. So this is just something to be knowledgeable of. If you're taking your vehicle and trying to sell it on the used car market, there are risks. Of course, there's risks on getting hosed, scammed, and as well, just the time wasting that you often get when people just say they'll show up or say they'll meet you and then they never make it. those are time wasters. But I also understand the instant gratification piece. A lot of people shop, they're out kicking tires, they're looking at new vehicles, and they're realizing, oh, look at this. Wow, that's a very cool vehicle. I need to have one of those. But then they want it right away. And it's that instant gratification where often people give up money or leave money on the table. That $30,000 vehicle on the retail market, you're giving up $5,000. And that's not an insignificant amount of money. You just have to ask yourself, is your time worth that money? Most cases, I personally have sold vehicles on the used car market because I value my money, possibly a little bit more than my time, but in most cases it's come out in the right place. But there are cases where you have to share stories, and quite honestly, if you happen to have one of those vehicles that maybe has stories, maybe has accident history, you know, maybe it has had some incidents, maybe there's a Carfax that isn't clean, maybe there's some problems with the vehicle that you're sort of aware of, and it's that whole idea of like, I just don't want to deal with that. It's got a slipping transmission, it's got some brakes, it's got some electrical system issues, and you don't necessarily want to have to explain it to the person, the person buying the vehicle. If you don't want to get in front of that, if you don't want to have to deal with explanations and explaining what's wrong with the vehicle, then sometimes a trade-in just works. You just walk away from it, wash your hands, and move on. And the dealer quite often will know exactly what they're looking for. They'll run it through their shop, and if it's a mess, it'll go to the auction. That auction will wind up going to some little corner lot, and sadly, somebody else down the road eventually might pick up that heap.
So if you're trading in your used vehicle, don't get suckered in. Maybe possibly sell it privately. If you're taking it to the dealer, make sure that they're giving you fair market value. The third story, another recent experience when we brought our vehicle in for service at the local Toyota dealership. Of course, another interesting storyline. This is actually happening, and a lot of dealers across the nation are pulling this little tactic on you, the unsuspecting buyer.
CarMax, Carvana, a couple of examples of some of the giant car sellers over on the US side of the border are classic examples of how they can grab a vehicle from a customer, give appropriate amount of cash, and of course, set them on their way, reselling it, of course, for 2, 3, 4 points, you know, multiple percentages above what they paid for. A lot of customers are looking at getting out of their debts, their loans, maybe wanting to move into something else, and those big car retailers are there to help the customers along their way. And some new tactics that many car dealers are trying on unsuspecting customers. Yes, if you've got a late model vehicle, a used vehicle that you take in for servicing, a late model vehicle that you often visit the dealer for parts, servicing, changing, maintenance, you name it, repairs, those dealers are literally taking advantage of you in a newfound way. Shortages both on the new car sector and as well as the new cars, which we're now seeing used car shortages all over, and dealers are trying to get their hands on as much inventory as they possibly can. But when we saw this car, we knew that they were changing. They were going with a hybrid, so obviously with the new electrification, hybrid technology, and some of the different drivetrains meant that this was one of the last reliable, durable, robust, more traditional Toyota, and we knew we were going to keep it for a while, so this is what we ordered. Yes, dealers are trying to get their hands on these types of products that don't have incidents, accidents, products that don't have problems, products that are reputable manufacturers, and certainly products that they know they can sell for a premium dollar. And cars like the Toyota Camry, the Corolla, RAV4s, Highlanders, any of these popular Toyota products, even the 4Runner is one of those very popular models. If you happen to have one of those late generation ones from the previous generation with the V6, you know those were worth a mint right now. But we bought this car and we realized something new that's going on in the dealership network space. This is a new tactic, a new trick, and something that they're trying to pull over on a lot of unsuspecting customers. You just want to be aware of this because they're going to use your visit to the dealership for your next service appointment as an opportunity to try to pull a fast one over on you. See, the dealers know what's selling. The dealers know what's popular. They got the ears to the tracks and they're always listening. They know that hybridization is something that not everybody's getting on board with, and certain electrification is not. Also, a lot of extra electronics in the cockpit of the vehicle is something that a lot of customers aren't getting all that excited about. That's why vehicles like this, they know are going to be easy to sell. So if you've got a used vehicle that has some of this older technology, you know, you've got older switches, older controls, lots of standard knobs and buttons and other controls. You know, you get that 8-speed automatic transmission or some of these torque converter autos, which are hard to find because a lot of manufacturers are going with things like CVTs, but that's besides the point. A very conventionally dressed Toyota like this vehicle is one that seems to be hard to find and quite sought after. And we found that out. before we bought this vehicle, we were struggling looking high, looking low for good used late model vehicles, but to no avail. Everything we were looking at had higher miles on it, accident history, a story, a collision, something to it. And it's hard to find good quality used vehicles, at least within 2 or 3 years of age, it seems. Yeah, if you look around, you could find 10, 15, 20-year-old vehicles. There's products out there, but the dealers aren't in the process of making money on older clapped out stuff. They need inventory that's typically in that 1 to 5 year time frame. That's where they make their money. That's where the margins are, and they have a better way of tracking the true value of those vehicles. What's going on now? We know that the inventory levels are dropping. We're down to just over 2 million products or vehicles across the used car sector. We know that the average price, transaction price, is about $25K, and we know that 39 days supply is roughly the amount of inventory each dealer has. And I've spoken about this in a very previous video, but I want to expand on that because this is exactly what's happening now. Because of the low inventory levels, because of the high prices of new cars, a lot of people are shopping around for the used stuff. And the used cars, of course, now are commanding a little bit more money. We're seeing prices edge up. We're seeing vehicles, the average transaction price edging up for late model used vehicles, 1 to 2% here in the last 6 months. It's clear that it's trending upwards. Costs are increasing. Why is that? Because of the shortages. You often ask yourself, where do the dealers get their used inventory? There's generally a couple of places. One, of course, they're going to get it from trade-ins. People buy new vehicles, they're always going to ask, do you have something to trade? And quite often, that's a source of some of their inventory. But unfortunately, a lot of the trade-ins aren't worthy. Some of the trade-ins are junk. Some of the trade-ins have extremely high mileage or products that maybe take way too much reconditioning, and they just simply don't want to handle that type of vehicle. So not every vehicle that gets traded in gets redressed and put back on the lot. So unfortunately, they sift through the chaff. A lot of those vehicles go to auction. So then how do they get some of their other inventory? A lot of it, of course, is the auctions. A lot of them are closed dealer auctions where they're able to capitalize on the dealer network. You know, the dealers bring in vehicles. A lot of times they're lease returns. I worked at an auction like that once myself many, many moons ago. I worked for Ford auction, a closed auction exclusive for dealers only. And I saw how the ins and outs of that works. But ultimately, it's trading of hands. The dealers, they all know each other. They're all shaking hands. They're swapping inventory or, you know, doing all kinds of little exchange deals across the board. Hey, I've got this Ford. Yeah, I've got this Honda. And they'll do a switch deal or some other arrangement. So there's always behind the scenes trades, but there's often auctions that they deal with as well. So with that said, you know, in my experience with that, that's one of the sources of getting some of their inventory. Of course, a lot of it's their network. They'll reach out to other dealers across, maybe across the city, across the province or state, and even across the country, possibly through some of their networks and affiliates, to see if they've got some other inventory that they can maybe steal from one place, bring to another. But ultimately, the inventories are low and they're shrinking at an alarming rate. When we booked our car in here, this little Toyota, we booked it in for a service. You know, we had the service reminder on there and it told us that, okay, it was time, it was due for oil, filters, rotation, tire rotation. They always check the floor mats on there as well. But it was time for your standard annual service, brake checks and the like. Prior to that, we got a call from the service manager. Actually, the general manager reached out to us and said, you know, while your vehicle's in here, would you have any opposition just to us to just do a quick appraisal on it? No commitment, no harm, no foul. We'll just do appraisal. We'll say, hey, what we see your vehicle's worth. And if there's any possibility we can help you get you into your next new dream car by Toyota, we'll certainly be willing to talk about it, but there's no commitment. We said, you know what? No, we're good. We're happy with what we've got. We know that trading up usually means we're going to have to take on more loan, more debt. And we are quite satisfied with this car. It's great. It's been running well. And quite honestly, it's affordable and it's paid off. So that's the main key. The average car payment today, we know, is $750 to $800 per month. That's the average. With many people, about 1 in 5 are over $1,000 a month these days. So people are getting in over their head. So getting into a car that we were able to pay off in short order was a great situation. And the last thing we wanted to do was trade this in and having to take on another loan for another $20,000 or $30,000 to upgrade this even to the entry point of a brand new Camry, which is essentially the same car, except it's a hybrid. We took the vehicle in for servicing, which that's another story. And I've shared that storyline. We weren't satisfied with the servicing, but that's another conversation. We go in upon the completion of the service. We grab the keys, and all of a sudden, lo and behold, the manager is there to greet us with some paperwork. And he says, you know what? We just took it upon ourselves to run an evaluation of the value of your car. And we just thought we'd share that with you. Just information, again, no commitment. But we said that we weren't interested. Why are you doing this ahead anyway? Well, it doesn't cost anything. Like, it's just information for your own good, they said. I said, well, we didn't ask for that. We didn't want that. And why are you going ahead and doing this anyway? So they did it. And this is a common tactic now that's starting to happen. Because of these shortages of inventory, they're trying to get vehicles that a lot of people were buying a few years ago. They're looking at trying to get vehicles off of people's hands and get them into new vehicles. That's their line of business, right? Ultimately is moving metal. So moving metal, they have to sell new inventory. If they don't sell new inventory because people are constantly happy with their old vehicles, well, that business doesn't have a great value proposition then, does it? So they gave us this written estimate anyhow, and we reviewed it, and basically what it said was, we know what the value of this car is, of a late model generation, something that is, you know, in good shape, well kept, lower miles. You know they're going to be looking for your vehicle. You know they're coming for your car because they're not getting the inventory. Lease returns aren't coming back. Auctions are quieter these days. There's less leases coming back. There's less cars hitting the market, less trade-ins. There's just more old school inventory out there, more people driving the older vehicles. You know, the average vehicle on the road today is about 13 years of age, where it used to be about, say, 8 or 9 years of age only about 10 years ago. People are keeping their vehicles around longer, but these dealers are trying to grab them out of your hands. And so they're offering you deals.
So while that's not a devastating turn, as long as you know what your car is worth, if you're willing to trade it in, that's fine. But you also want to check out my video on our story about when we brought this vehicle in for servicing, how they truly led us down the garden path. The fourth story is about Ford's newest, cheapest trucks. Can you afford this? I mean, these prices of these new F-150s, 250s, 350s, they're going through the roof. It's not uncommon to pay $100,000 plus for a new truck. Well, guess what? Ford's got these lower price vehicles. Maybe those are exactly what you're looking for.
I thought Ford was supposed to be giving us deals. These employee discounts are supposed to be available, and these A-price, A-level discounts were supposed to get us a deal. Yes, right here we have this beautiful new F-150 STX. And clearly this doesn't feel like a deal to me because the STX was supposed to start in Canadian dollars at $57,000. Okay, so this would be, you would think, somewhere in that $57,000 because the STX is sort of their base trim line. Everything's a lot more basic on the STX. Of course, you see the STX. I like the style here. Of course, they give you this nice little lime green detailing on there, but there we are, the STX. Gorgeous truck. Big alloys, of course you get that, but these are plastic, very much XL feeling, plastic all over plastic. There's no rear slider on here, there's no sunroof, there's no spray and liner. We have a feature list right here, all kinds, but unfortunately, if you look right here, we're dealing with a price tag of $70,000. So my question is, how do you go from $57,000 base price Canadian prices, that's what they list them at, up to $70,000? This is an STX. That's a base trim level vehicle. So is it any wonder people aren't buying? And it's not a shocker why sales are slowing down. A lot of buyers are making other choices instead of looking at these highly priced vehicles. Even unfortunately with the cost of living, people are making decisions to whether they want to eat or have a roof over their head. Buying a new car certainly is always a nice to have for sure, but only if it makes sense, only if the budget will allow. But when you're taking a base trim vehicle and all of a sudden you've loaded it up for some reason for an STX or an XL, and you're all of a sudden almost $15,000 more than what they listed as from, or the base trim on the MSRP, it makes you wonder, how did we even get here? Where's the prices? Where's that $57,000 STX that they promised all over the ads? I mean, a little Ford Escape right here, beautiful little rig, but this is the active all-wheel drive version. Of course, you get basic little fabric in there. It's a cute little vehicle. I remember we went out and bought one a bunch of years ago. Our in-laws actually went and bought one of these vehicles. At the time, it was a 2013, and they went in there and they got the base trim, base. They got the naturally aspirated 2.5 liter 4. They also got, they skipped the EcoBoost. That was the redesign of the Escape, and it was a front-wheel drive version. It was basically their stripped-out model, but they paid $20,000 for that vehicle. So where are we at today with this? For essentially, which is almost the same vehicle, not much more. Well, we're at $42,000 for this model. So in barely over 10 years later, Sure, they've added all-wheel drive. It's doubled in price. It's not double the vehicle, but they've doubled up the price. How about this little beauty we have in F-150 Tremor? What a gorgeous truck. I like this. Now, this isn't the top of the line. We're not talking King Ranch. We're not talking about the Harley editions. We're certainly not talking even Platinum. This is sort of a sporty looking truck. Yeah, they give you some mud terrains, all-terrain tires. You get the nice decals on there and painted, you know, mirrors and painted. I do like this. This is a nice touch. The steel upgrade on that. Nice wheels, but again, they're matte black. Nothing too fancy there. You get a rear slider. Tremor decals there, of course, and of course LEDs. Split rear tailgate. It's a beautiful truck. It clearly has a lot of features to it. I don't know how much more you're going to get if you order up the Platinum or something more premium. You don't have a sunroof in this vehicle. There's no sunroof, but it looks like you've got heated and cooled seats inside. So it does have a fairly loaded up spec minus the sunroof. It does look quite nice, in fact. But again, we know where the Platinums, they typically fall. They're quite premium. These ones here are not cheap, I bet, either. And as you look right there, it's a price tag of $93,000, 290 bucks all in. Well, not even all in. That's basically just plus the extras, plus. All in, probably out the door price of this vehicle is going to be about $100,000 for this vehicle in Canadian dollars. A lot of you are commenting on that, and I apologize in advance, but that's 100 grand out the door for a Tremor F-150. That's not even the top trim level vehicle. Here we have a little Bronco Sport. This is the smaller one that's made allegedly, I believe, in Mexico, if I'm not mistaken. Oh, look, they've got this cute little bar on the front. That's a nice little detail on there. But otherwise, you know, you get this extra plastic all-terrain rubber on here. You see outer banks, definitely has some other features. Cheap, but you know what, you got the roof rack on here. It's a cute little vehicle. But how much is this Bronco Sport going to cost you? Oh, look, you do get extras like this. That's not on all of the Bronco Sports. There's no doubt this is going to be a higher trim level vehicle, outer banks. What do we have here? Bronco Sport, right there, as you see, it's a Bronco Sport. We're talking about a $53,000 price tag there, everybody. $53,000 for a Bronco Sport with a few little upgrades on it. How much is this Super Duty? Well, how about $113,000 for this particular unit? You used to be able to get a Carrera 4 Cabriolet, you know, about 10 years ago for that same kind of money. Things have gotten seriously out of control. The Maverick is something that used to be a car, and you think back in the 70s, Maverick, that little car, it was a cute little vehicle. Now they're coming out with this little truck, and they had to come up with something because buyers didn't have the money, or there was a less and less. They were squeezing a lot of the buyers out of the market, so they reinvented something, reinvented the wheel, and came up with something that maybe could get some buyers back into smaller trucks. So here we have a list of features. This one here is a Maverick Lariat, and as you'll see, you do get painted parts. You do get the nice, I guess they're sort of vinyl, I don't know if that's leather. You get a sunroof on top, and this one is the Lariat. As you can see, you do get painted mirrors, alloy wheels. Nice little rig here, even a sunroof on top of this vehicle. But this one here comes at a significant price point because this one is $51,000 right there, everybody. 51K. Wow. Well, now granted, of course, that's higher trim. There is a Tremor level as well, and there's a Raptor, but you know what, that's an upper trim level in terms of overall features. Here as well, we have an STX. This one here is another vehicle that was another step point up. Of course, if you couldn't afford the F-150, you might look at one of these, because here we have the new Ranger. You get alloys, nice looking detail on there, full-size step guard right there. This one's the STX, so we know the STX is their base trim level vehicles, and it's a good looking truck. Although in the white, the dressed in work site job site white, this is what it comes in. I would definitely dress it up, try to find a better color, unless you like to drive around in something that looks like a work truck. The STX is the base model. At least you get a four-wheel drive, which is great, and of course a lot of other good wearing parts. No sliders on there though, and no sunroof on the roof. Very interesting interior, lots of plastic all over, plastic fantastic. But this Ranger is going to cost you $48,000, and that's Canadian dollars. If there's one thing that we can honestly say, the prices aren't going down anytime soon. And with a lot of customers now struggling to make ends meet, and a lot of people that would be buying a car have elected to maybe skip on that and say, defer, I don't need a car today, maybe I'll hang on to a time that I can actually afford something. Not sure that time's coming anytime quickly, because what we're hearing with these tariffs, and even if there aren't tariffs, nothing ever goes down in price. Everything just ratchets up, up, up. And we know that historically. Look over long-term trends, S&P 500. Look at every stock, real estate, just about everything goes up over time. So if you think you're going to wait 5 or 10 years and you think that maybe you'll get in a better financial position, or the money will finally be more affordable on the tag of some of these vehicles, I'm not sure. These vehicles, cars, trucks, SUVs, and Ford certainly is in there with the mix, definitely seem to be slowly creeping these prices up. Price creep year over year over year. And even for the base trim vehicles, low-level vehicles, things aren't getting any cheaper. So I had a viewer named Jack who reached out and said, look, his last truck just finally blew an engine. He had 260,000 miles on it. It was done. So he started looking at, he loved Fords because he's a brand loyalist. He loves the brand. He likes to represent. And then he started looking at something a little cheaper because he couldn't afford the new Ford F-150s. He was shocked by the sticker price. Then, of course, he looked at even some of the Bronco Sports and realized they're even a little pricier. So then he started looking at these vehicles, the Escapes, and he thought, okay, they're not nearly what he had before, but he thought, okay, at least he can get into a new vehicle that he can hopefully afford, that he can hopefully run for 5 to 10, maybe 15 years, because he doesn't have a lot of money. He's a single dad, certainly looking after 2 kids, and is just looking to get into something reasonably affordable. He doesn't have a lot of money, and unfortunately, he's looking for something that fits his budget. Well, his budget was about $450 a month is the way he set it up. But unfortunately, when you run the loan calculator, these $40,000 Escape here, this is a Ford. This is their entry-level vehicle, the Ford Escape, priced at $40,000. When you run the loan calculator, 5-year loan at 5% interest rate pulled out over a 5-year loan term is going to end up costing about $700 per month. And we're not even talking about insurance costs, but the vehicle that blows him out of the water, he cannot even afford the entry-level Ford. He's going to have to look at something older and new, maybe with some miles on it, and hope for the best. So now, unfortunately, with the EcoSport being discontinued, even the most affordable vehicles are no longer available from Ford.
Do these cheap trucks, the new Maverick, the Ford Ranger, are they cheap enough? Or maybe is it time to keep looking? Do as a lot of customers possibly have to look around for the used car market? That's where some of the real value is. And the fifth story, we're going to talk about some of the do's and don'ts if you're buying a used vehicle. Clearly today's theme was buying used because of a lot of people are making that choice. It's a very affordable way to go. You get more bang for buck. And the dwindling inventory suggests it's a very popular choice that a lot of buyers are making. People are buying more used cars because the new car prices are just too high. We know the average transaction price for a new car is up close to 50 grand, but yet the used car transaction price averages around $25,000. It's pretty clear that more and more people are buying used cars. As a result, there's less inventory on the market. But there are some do's and don'ts. If you're buying a used car, you can save a huge amount of money, possibly get yourself a great vehicle for fractions of the money. There are some tips that you need to be aware of. There's certainly some do's and some don'ts when you're buying these used vehicles. I've bought dozens of used vehicles, hundreds actually throughout my career, and owned dozens of them myself personally. And I've gone through these many steps throughout the years, and definitely learn some do's and don'ts and some ins and outs. Now there's a ton of tips, but I'm going to break this down to a few quick ones. Quick and easy, we can get in more detail later on, but really let's break this down, a few key tips if you're buying a used vehicle. So some of the do's are don't rush, okay? Do not rush. The worst thing you can do is go out there, just drive around, see what's on the lots, and get impressed. Of course, seeing that shiny new car out there is enough to honestly get some people riled up, get people agitated and excited and fired up, and they want to buy that new car and they see that shiny new paint job. That's probably the worst thing that you can do, is window shopping, because then you start buying with your heart and you don't buy as much with this. So don't rush ever. And that, when I say that, the idea behind that is do your research at home first. Okay, don't be in a panic, cool your jets, settle it down, and basically just shop from your living room. Understand what the do's and don'ts are. Understand the budget. Understand how much you have to spend. Understand how much you're willing to pay a month, if at all. Understand if you have the cash. Understand what meets your needs. You need all-wheel drive? You're shopping for an all-wheel drive vehicle. Do you need a small car because you're looking for something cheap? Keep it within that focus. If you need a pickup truck because you're going to be doing frequent hauling and towing, focus on that and don't sway to things like smaller SUVs that look cute but don't necessarily meet the intent and have you regretting it later on. So don't be in a rush, never panic, do your homework, understand what your budgets are, the type of vehicle you need, and certainly when you start shopping, don't let the dealers know that you're in need. I mean, the worst thing you can do, of course, is during that rushing process, if you are rushing, is dealers can pick up on that. And they'll quickly try to put you into something that in often, many cases, they're not very well researched and you probably don't even want that vehicle anyway. They're trying to get rid of something that does them best and not always for you. And while I've come across many salespeople that are pushy and say, you know what, we're here just to understand what you, the buyer, needs. Yes, there is a part of that, but at the same token, there's a lot of dealers that just want to unload unwanted inventory. So that's the first point, do not rush. The second one is be thorough. When you're shopping for a used car, you have to be very, very thorough. And what do I mean by that? Well, again, not just understanding the type of vehicle you want and the type of vehicle that meets your needs, but when you start shopping, make sure when you're out there looking around that you understand some of the worst things about that vehicle. Some of the best things, is there an Achilles? Does that type of vehicle have a bad transmission inherently? If it does, make sure you observe those driving features when you're out test driving these vehicles. Understand in its entirety, research that vehicle thoroughly. Understand the goods, the bads, the uglies, and understand how it meets your intent and your budget and how it may actually fall short. So ultimately be very thorough. On top of it, when you're looking at these vehicles, on top of the whole thorough aspect, look around the vehicle. I mean, look at the lines, the door panel, the panel gaps. Make sure they're always consistent. Does it look like it's consistent with factory? Look from one side to the other side. Those are telltales if there's possibly been some damage or overspray. Along with the thorough, definitely inspect a lot of the body panels in overspray. I mean, you don't want to see paint overspray on, plastic or glass or in the rocker sections or rockers, or certainly within the door wells. You open up the door and you don't want to see some weird overspray that doesn't look like it's matched up, because a lot of people tend to cut corners when they're doing a quick respray and they don't necessarily do the jams. So they're more inclined to just sort of spray with the door closed, and you might find some of that overspray in places that you don't want to find it. Of course, with that, make sure you do a Carfax or CarProof always, 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 because it's going to tell you if that car's been in an accident, maybe it's been flood history. Those are the things that how thorough you need to be. You need to understand the history of that vehicle, what sort of service records are available, and it sort of paints up this timeline and the lifespan of that vehicle. Now, if it's a one-year-old vehicle, it probably doesn't have a lot of records. But understand where it was serviced, who's looking after it, and where did it come from? Is it a Southeast Florida vehicle? You better check on that, make sure there's no flood damage on it. Also, check the mechanicals. Make sure you do a test drive. Does it pull one way or the other? Does it judder? Does it accelerate strangely? Is there sort of surges in the power delivery? Are there weird noises? Is there smoke out of the exhaust? Strange noises on the front end could be timing chains, rod knocks at the bottom. I mean, you want to pay attention and be very thorough on the sounds it makes and the way it actually drives. Is it driving as expected or not? But the next one is don't get pressured. These are some things, do's and don'ts. So if you're at the dealership, and we already spoke about this in some detail, of course, don't rush, but also don't be pressured, because by going and doing your research before you even leave your living room couch, you already know what you're looking for, right? Do you need that small sporty SUV, or do you need that car that's under $25,000 or under $20,000? Whatever that is, know what it is that's in your budget. Because what's going to happen, in some cases, dealers will respect what you want. Sometimes they're going to push you into something they want to get rid of, or if you don't know what you want, they in fact may try to swing you one way or the other. Like if you have not decided what you're looking for, that's probably the one worst place to be. Because ultimately, if you haven't figured out what's what meets your intent, what meets your critical needs for driving dynamics, or your budget, or any of that. If you don't even know what you want yourself, then what you're going to have is a dealer pushing you into something that they want. Again, I've said this, but the point is, know what you want and don't be pressurized or pressured into it. Of course, the dealers are going to try to sell you on whatever they can. They're definitely going to try to sell you on extras. They're going to try to put some of these extra features in there and try to upsell extended warranties and key fob protection, even on vehicles that might be used. Yes, they may still try to sell you protection packages. I've seen that time and time again. You could come across a 3-year-old vehicle that's maybe on the tail end of its warranty. They in fact might try to sell you on an extended warranty. They might try to sell you on a key fob protection replacement packages, or dent protection package, or rim replacement, which by the way is one of the biggest scams, because we had a situation like that recently with one of ours. We had the protection package which was thrown in, and they said, we'll do you a good one on that. But it turns out when it came time to collect, they had all these exclusions that said, no, sorry, we had a scratched rim, and they said, no, we're not going to cover that. So ultimately they have exclusions. In most cases, it's simply not worth it. So don't be pressured into buying extended features, extended warranties, buying cars that you're not prepared to buy, or cars that you don't even want to own. So naturally, do your homework beforehand, set your budget, and don't be pressured into buying something you don't want. Another one. Here's one that's so important, I can't help but express this. Of course, have you ever heard the adage, you've got to spend money to make money? Well, in some cases, this is also true in buying a car. You could walk down and say, look, my budget is X. I might have $20,000. That's all I have. The proper perspective to look at this is budgeting accordingly for things like a pre-purchase inspection. You see, that's money well spent. And so many people go in there, even trusting what the dealer says. How many times have you gone to the dealer and say, hey, what condition of this vehicle is in? The first thing out of their mouth is, well, we already ran it through the shop and we have the inspection sheet. Look, people, I've been through this time and time again. You'd be absolutely foolish to 100% take their word. The first thing out of your mouth would be, well, 2 things. Number 1 is, can I please see that inspection sheet? Can I have a peruse? In most cases, they'll deliver and they'll show you that. They'll probably print a copy off for you because they're trying to make a sale. But the second point is not just go through their points, because often they'll say brakes, check, tires, check, glass, check. They'll do all those things, but they don't really give you detail. How much of the brakes? How much brake wearing left? How much of the tire wear is left on these vehicles? Because so often, more often than not, they'll just go through a bunch of check boxes and say, it's good. By whose standards? By whose criteria? If you are importing a vehicle from out of state or out of province, I found that their levels of expectation are much higher than they would be in local dealers that might say, well, the tires still have 40% left, we're good. But actually, if you're importing a vehicle, say from out of country, their standards are much higher. 830 seconds, they're going to want to see numbers that are much better. They're going to want to see tires that are almost new, brakes that are good, and everything that's working. So importing a vehicle has a much higher level of scrutiny than a lot of these local dealers. So raise your expectation rather than lower it. So ultimately, spending more money on the front end is going to likely save you. And what do I mean? Pre-purchase inspections. So you have this inspection sheet from the dealer. Then you say, okay, that's fine. Are you okay if I take this vehicle in and have it inspected at a third-party dealer, or even more importantly, even at a like kind of dealer? For example, you're looking at this new Ford, but it's being sold on a Honda lot. Okay, you say, look, the Ford dealer just down the road, they're very familiar with this type of truck. Do you mind if I take it over there and have them look it over? Most dealers are going to be pretty good about it, but it's something I strongly advise on doing. If the dealer's not okay in you taking it away, red flag, run. Don't even bother. There's lots of cars out there for sale. Don't even bother. They're hiding something. Guaranteed they're hiding something. Now, if they say, look, if you say, look, I've got this guy who knows a guy who knows a guy. He's got a little back alley shop that he operates out of his garage. Good guy, but he just has his little back. Some dealers are not going to be comfortable with that. But if you offer up and say, look, I want to take this down to one of the reputable dealers of the same kind, most of these guys, most of these dealers, guys and gals, are going to be totally fine with that. And that's good. because you're going to want to do that. And here's where it's going to cost you some money. Doing things like a full inspection. You know, you set the tone. You set the expectation on the other dealer's end. It's really the sky's the limit. Are you going as far as doing leak down checks, compression checks? You know, are you going that level? Because that's going to cost you a lot more money. But in some cases, if it's, say, an engine that has a known probability issue, you know, say certain generations of 911s have issues with bore scoring, you might even ask for them to do a bore score check, you know, where they pull a spark plugs and they start looking down the cylinder walls to make sure that there's no scoring. See, those are extra checks you may ask for with certain vehicles that have a high probability of having that type of issue. So just know that you set the tone, know the vehicle you're dealing with, do the research, and if some of those checks make sense, do it. Bore scoring, compression checks, make sure you've got good compression, make sure the engine runs well, but more importantly, get the numbers, the brakes, the tires, the drivability, let the mechanics go underneath, make sure you're not dealing with suspension problems, because even a loose suspension system, a front end, could end up costing you thousands of dollars to make it right. So a good, honestly, a good road test will flush out a lot of those issues, but realistically a mechanic is what it takes to get underneath there, checks play top to bottom, left to right, looks underneath the condition. He'll also potentially find issues like rust and corrosion at, mounting points in the suspension and the frame. You're going to want to have somebody look at that. And most people like you and I, we're going to look at a car from the top down. You're probably not going to be able to look underneath. So it's worth its weight in gold to pay for that pre-purchase inspection. It might cost you $300. It might cost you $500, $600. But trust me, if you're getting down to it and it's an expensive vehicle, I mean, barring, of course, if you're buying, 25-year-old beater and it's only costing you $1,200 to buy the car, whatever. If it drives good, don't even bother. Pre-purchase inspection's not money well spent. But if you're buying a late model vehicle and say they're asking $27,000 for it, you 100% want to get a pre-purchase inspection done on it, because they could in fact either flush out problems, find these issues and identify them and alert you to these potential problems so that at least you know what you're dealing with, or it offers up a negotiations tactic to the dealer who's selling the car. They might say, look, okay, you've got a differential that's howling, it's making noise. Then of course the dealer's going to give an estimate and say, well, that's going to cost $4,200. Well, now you've got a negotiation that you can go to the dealer, the person that's selling the car, and say, look, this is what they found. It's running fine now, but it's howling, and there's a good chance that, in short order, I might be dealing with this. At least now you've got a conversation point. If it's just your word of mouth against somebody else's, it's always going to be arm wrestling match. But realistically, if you get a third-party mechanic looking at this, they can identify these shortcomings. And that now becomes a negotiation tactic for you and a possible money savers for you. It also gives you availability to decide, do I want this car or not? Maybe it's more than I can bite off. Are you ready to buy that used vehicle? Hopefully now you're armed with the information you need to go out there and buy and pay minimal and get the best bang for buck. And of course, I promised you, our recent experience with our Toyota when we brought it into the service department was absolutely earth-shattering. And as well down there, one of the latest and greatest videos. Hope to see each and every one of you on the next one. Have a wonderful weekend, everybody. See you then. Bye-bye.